Hello, I'm Jonasz Rewiński. Welcome on board the Eastern Express, and as always, I hope you enjoy the journey ahead. Chinese spies are not coming to Europe. They're already here, drifting through parliaments, think tanks, dissident meetings, and even your LinkedIn inbox. From Berlin to London to Stockholm, courts and security services are finally admitting what Beijing has been quietly building for years. A dense web of agents, cutouts, cyber units and friendly voices embedded in Europe's politics, technology and security sectors. On this episode, we follow the trail from a convicted spy in the office of a far-right German MP through fake headhunters targeting British lawmakers online to fishing for missile secrets in wartime Ukraine. This isn't a collection of isolated scandals either. It's one big picture. And it's a picture the European Union can no longer afford to pixelate away, while its own security services are quietly filing China under active threat. Without further ado, here is a look at our latest report.
The warning landed quietly in inboxes across Westminster. A fresh MI5 alert, but with an old message. China is once again fishing in Britain's political waters. Two LinkedIn profiles, dressed up as global headhunters written in clumsy English, have been flagged as fronts for Beijing's Ministry of State Security. British officials say the pattern is now unmistakable. Researchers in Parliament describe suspicious job offers arriving out of the blue. The aide said the discovery left him on edge, a reminder of how easily junior staff could be drawn in. According to the alert, Beijing's method is simple: cultivate contacts, collect bits of information and build leverage over time. All expenses study trips, crypto payments and networking sites have replaced old-style espionage. Targets range from MPs' assistants to economists and think tank analysts. In the House of Commons, ministers say the UK will no longer treat this as background noise. New funds, new encryption and tighter rules on political financing form the backbone of a national security upgrade aimed squarely at China. And the security minister says Britain is now shifting from warnings to action. Beijing dismisses the accusations as fabrication, but for the UK's intelligence agencies, the quiet contest for information is already underway, and Westminster says it intends to answer back.
And now we're zoning in on the East-splaining portion of our show. Artificial intelligence was meant to simplify work, but now it's reportedly simplifying espionage. Developers behind the chatbot Claude say they have uncovered what they call the world's first AI-orchestrated hacking campaign. Here is how it unfolded.
Anthropic claims hackers posing as cybersecurity researchers tricked Claude into completing small automated tasks that together formed a coordinated cyber operation against around 30 global organizations. The company believes the attackers were linked to the Chinese state, saying the targets range from tech firms to financial institutions. The chatbot allegedly generated code, sifted stolen data and identified what was valuable until Anthropic blocked the accounts and notified companies and law enforcement. But analysts say the claims lack hard evidence, noting AI tools remain too unreliable for fully autonomous breaches. Other AI firms have reported similar attempts, though most involved basic tasks like translation and debugging. Even Anthropic admits Claude often fabricated login details and confused public information for secrets, a major barrier for real autonomy. Still, the case highlights a shift. AI is increasingly present on both sides of the cyber frontline. And as companies warn that AI attackers may require AI defenders, the debate over hype versus real risk is only just beginning.
And now let's take a look at the issue in greater detail. China's not just knocking on Europe's door anymore. It's already inside the building, has a visitor's badge, and apparently knows the Wi-Fi password better than half the IT department. It is something European leaders would prefer to call a systemic rivalry, even as their own security services quietly rewrite it as "we have a China problem." And all of it points to one simple truth. The European Union's China policy is stuck in 2019, while China's operations in Europe are very much in 2025. Let's begin in Germany, where the threat showed up as an assistant in a major party's office. Jiang Guo, longtime aide to AfD politician Maximilian Krach, was sentenced to 4 years and 9 months in prison for spying for China. For years, he passed confidential documents from the European Parliament and fed information on Chinese dissidents straight back to Beijing's security services. He even posed as a pro-democracy activist while betraying actual activists. Guo was not alone. A fellow Chinese national, known as Yachi X, received a sentence for passing sensitive details about Germany's defense sector, including military transport data, to China. This was a long game, you see, slowly building a picture of European decision-making, security posture, and defense logistics, using the European Union's own democratic openness as a data source. Now, in the UK, MI5 has just warned lawmakers that Chinese intelligence is using LinkedIn to recruit and cultivate political insiders. Fake recruiters with glossy profiles reach out to MPs, advisors, civil servants, think tankers, and economists, offering consultancy work, or quietly probing for access documents and influence. Head to Sweden now, and the story gets even uglier. Swedish authorities arrested a Chinese man for spying on Uyghur communities, people who already fled persecution, only to find Beijing's reach extending into European streets and living rooms. A Chinese journalist, Shuefei Chen Axelson, was deported amid suspicions that journalism was a convenient cover for intelligence work. The message is grimly consistent. Dissidents are never really safe. They are merely abroad for now. And on the front line of Europe's real war, Ukraine detained a Chinese student, his father, for trying to send classified information on the Neptune missile system to, again, China. Not only is that a gift to Beijing's own military planners, it also indirectly helps Russia, which depends on Chinese dual-use tech and components to keep its war machine going. When China collects Ukrainian defense secrets, it's feeding into a system that later keeps drones over European airports. The EU's China policy is still based on a 2019 strategic outlook that describes Beijing as partner, competitor, and systemic rival. The problem is that systemic rival was left vague, a diplomatic shrug rather than a clear security diagnosis. The European Union doesn't have to choose between trade with China and security from China. It has to stop pretending those two can be separated. And now here to shed more light on this story is Marcin Grabowski, Associate Professor at the Jagiellonian University. Hello and welcome to Eastern Express.
Good afternoon, pleasure to see you.
So when thinking about Chinese espionage, how would you say it differs from, let's say, Russian espionage? People have a mental image of a spy, often based on old films of James Bond and, KGB agents trying to get some sort of secret knowledge out. But this is rather different, isn't it? Much different, actually.
I would say it's not totally different. Surprisingly, the stories we've been recently heard refer to human intelligence. And naturally, human intelligence is absolutely minority, absolutely less intense than what we observe as cyber espionage or what we see as other forms of like white espionage even, or white intelligence, if we could call it so. So definitely there are agents. The agents operate differently. Those connected with the movies are rather exception than the reality. But we can see that Chinese are more and more active in this human intelligence, if we can say so. However, they've been working on their positions for many years or decades. If we look at the European Union, if we look at Brussels, the report of European External Action Service referred to the fact that there were around 250, as they estimated, spies, agents of Chinese intelligence in the EU. broadly. So that's quite a large number regarding this human intelligence. And of course, they operate differently. They try to build links. They try to insert pressure on a certain people. They try to get influence in certain institutions. Pretty often using their double role as scientists, as students. In Chinese case, that's pretty popular. Um, People connected with Chinese businesses, etc. Yeah, so this is what may be kind of novelty, however, not total novelty, as we normally would associate them working under cover of diplomats. That's very convenient to a large extent because diplomats are of course, extra protected with their immunity. That's why it's widely used. At the same time, of course, EU is a safe space for spies, so technically there's not much risk for a Chinese spy operating within the EU, within the UK, because recently we've been heard a bit about British cases.
Oh, indeed we have. And I mean, that one could say was an example of a very subtle operation, right? Essentially, Chinese agents building up those relations, right? Trying to establish rapport. Would you say that it is easier for Chinese agents than, again, let's use a comparison, like than Russian ones? Because, well, in terms of Russia, people pretty much know what Russia is about today. I mean, there is a war going on, there are war crimes, so it's not really possible to actually go around that. But more people will be willing to talk to Chinese representatives or members of think tanks, organizations, or people posing as such, because you don't immediately have this sort of negative association, right? You have the perception of China obviously being a rival, but also a trade partner. In a much more extensive way than you have with Russia, where these trade relations are being wound down right now.
Absolutely, that's truth. At the same time, it's a little bit more complicated. So technically, we presume that it's easier for Russians to use their own agents operating undercover in different institutions in the EU, European countries, also due to kind of, don't want to go deep into this ethnic issues. Let's say, of course, if they would introduce themselves as Russians interested in scholarly collaboration, that would be totally excluded. And in this context, China indeed is or has a slightly easier task because that was visible in the UK recently. MI5, Military Intelligence 5, which is counterintelligence service, was pretty cautious in naming Chinese agents in order not to get into this approach of looking at China as hostile nation. Yeah? So not to offend China because it's important in investment in our economic collaboration. This is what you've mentioned. In this context, collaborating with Chinese was natural process, and like 6-7 years ago, European companies, European scholars, European students, universities were encouraged to collaborate with China. That has changed, and recent years definitely illustrate the fact that cooperation with Chinese is rather discouraged in this scholarly field. I refer to scholarly field because for China, it's really important to have access to sophisticated technologies. This is what they should get, like economic espionage, industrial espionage is important here. That's why I'm referring also to research and development activities. That's one area. The second area is to have influence, and this influence, you've mentioned this British case where we were looking at fake headhunters offering jobs that were well paid to people connected with British Parliament. Of course, that looked as suspicious. The English of those offers was rather poor, surprisingly. But at the same time, probably that was efficient. My personal experience looking at some events I participated within projects we run, like the one at Chatham House, you have Chinese students, so students of British universities, joining the events that are open or semi classified as students. At the same time, we realize they're actually seconded by Chinese administration, and that's very clear, undermining certain way of thinking. That's and way of influencing way of thinking, yeah, or questioning a perception we have in Europe. Now, I'm referring to the British case, the meetings I was participating. So that's the issue. But still, they are not excluded. Russians could be directly excluded. For Chinese, scholars are discouraged to cooperate with them. However, still their way to get there is relatively open. And again, we can have groups like political groups. This is maybe a German case that you've also looked at of Max Krah. That's a right-wing politician collaborating with Jiang Guo, being a spy interested in military technology, cooperating with recently arrested Ya X. Yeah, so that's just we don't have the full surname as she's suspected. So that's an issue that you have. I would say anti-systemic group that are collaborating with certain advisors, but in reality spies. And then, of course, the fact they're Chinese is not as easily noticed. But indeed, for Chinese, it's easier to operate now in the European Union, Brussels, European countries that are not within the UK, than if they would be Russians. At the same time, it's more difficult than spies from the US, for instance. Yes, so of course, there are different goals in this respect. But we have to remember, espionage is natural and has been natural for centuries or millennia, even. Yeah.
Professor Marcin Grabowski was our guest today here on TVP World. Thank you very much for joining us and for sharing your insight.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to visit you again.
And now we're moving on to the Eastern News Flash, a curated selection of all the other stories from the East that you really don't want to miss. A leaked US peace proposal is raising alarm in Ukraine, with lawmakers warning it mirrors Russia's demands and would hand over eastern territory in exchange for vague security pledges.
The US plan reportedly calls for Ukraine to surrender Donbas, suspend its NATO ambitions and cut its military in half. Kyiv says it wasn't consulted and that the document aligns closely with Moscow's position. President Donald Trump signed off on the framework crafted by his envoy Steve Witkoff and discussed with Putin's economic advisor Kirill Dmitriev. Ukrainian officials denounced the plan as dangerous and unrealistic. Lawmakers compared it to an appeasement in 1938. The deal would recognize Russian de facto control over Donbas and possibly Crimea, without demanding a full ceasefire or any verified concessions from the Kremlin. Zelensky's office confirmed receipt of the plan, but emphasized that Ukraine is not just territory, Ukraine is people. The proposal has drawn criticism across the political spectrum, with critics warning it could embolden Russia while leaving civilians behind enemy lines.
With Russian missiles targeting critical infrastructure, Ukraine is now allowing private companies to join its national air defense network under full military control.
Defense Minister Denis Shmyhal announced a new framework letting companies in sectors like energy and transport form air defense groups coordinated by the Ukrainian Air Force. The move aims to close coverage gaps and improve response times as winter attacks intensify. Under strict military oversight, vetted employees will receive orders through the Armed Forces Digital Command platform. Companies can acquire equipment with state approval and integrate their units into a unified air defense grid. The initiative, while experimental, reflects Kyiv's urgent need to reinforce protection around infrastructure sites. It is also a sign that civilian and military lines are blurring, as Russia ramps up pressure on their power grid and logistic routes.
And for this episode of Eastern Express, it's the end of the line. Please stay with us here on TVP World for more latest news and updates. I'm Jonasz Rewiński. Bye for now.